Hey everyone, this is Bresci. I am really excited today to be talking to Skye Lewin, the music director at Bungie. I'll be asking him about his past, a little bit about his job, and asking him some questions that you guys, the Destiny community, had sent me. So without further ado, let's go. Yeah, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Great. It's been very rainy this last week in Washington.
It has. It has. My job title is audio director. I'm also spending time with the music, hands-on composing a bit, working with the music team. Lots of odds and ends, but the goal is to make the game sound as good as possible and to help, enable the team to do that. So that's kind of a concise answer, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is burnout a problem for yourself in the team? With all the music you're constantly making for all these expansions every year. If so, how do you deal with it or prevent it?
I mean, I think everybody's different. I haven't seen that be an issue for our team, and I think part of the reason for that is because of two main things. One, Destiny. It's a pleasure to work on, and there's a lot of variability there with the score, both from the different areas of the universe and the different sounds that they have, and the freshness that brings to composing for different parts of it. And then also our team dynamic. We're very collaborative. We work together, and that collaborative keeps it fresh, and it kind of constantly makes the process feel new and fun. So no, it's not been an issue, which is good.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm always constantly having these times where just I can't think of ideas. I need to take like a break, and then suddenly I'll get an idea in my head. I gotta hum it into my phone. I gotta keep it. Maybe I'll realize no, this isn't so good, or maybe I can turn it into something that's really cool. So, I'm a really young learning composer, so it's awesome to just it's awesome that you guys are always constantly able to bring this awesome music to us. And I'm sure there's many issues and problems, but you guys are always able to tackle them and bring us a soundtrack that's awesome. So it's just really great.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it sounds like maybe having a group of people that you work with would be a good way to kickstart things, and or one of the things I like to do if I'm in a place where I feel like I'm not sure what the next step is, I don't try and think about it. I try and connect with what is like the emotion that I'm trying to convey, and then let that emotion become the music, if that makes sense. So instead of trying to come at it from a technical or music theory standpoint, or is this a good melody, more let the music be inspired by the context, the mood and the imagery or whatever is available. So might be fun to play around with that too.
Yeah, thank you. What is it like working with Mike, Josh, Michael, Rodham, Peter, the whole team? Does it feel like a family?
It does, and we kind of jokingly refer to ourselves as working like a band. Like we're members of a band. We contribute both in performance in some instances. Josh plays guitar a lot, and Michael play guitar a bit. I'll play drums and percussion, sometimes guitar, sometimes we'll play bass. Michael will play piano. So there's that kind of like performance aspect of it that is sort of like a band, but then also just the way we actually collaborate is similar to what you might imagine a band to be. So that's kind of the camaraderie and collaborative vibe that we have. Yeah, sorry, your camera looks like it's having a fun focus time. There you go.
Yeah, it sounds like a really fun team to be a part of. I'm sure all of them are amazing to work with.
Yeah, good people makes a big difference.
So has the idea for a melody you ever wrote just ever randomly come to you, like while you're, I don't know, watching TV or at a grocery store or something? And if so, can you recall any fun stories about like a particular one?
Yeah, all the time. Sometimes they happen while working, and other times, just the ideas are kind of floating around in your head. You're thinking about, I need to make this thing, and what does that feel like, or what does it look like, or I like this thing, but maybe not. Like the stuff floats around in your head, and so sometimes I'll have these moments like you're asking about, where I'm not trying to focus on it, and the thing just pops in, and I'm like, oh, that's it, that's the thing. And yeah, a couple of those moments have happened. One of them was for the theme from Rise of Iron. I was walking from one studio to the other. We were not working on that thing at all yet. Like it was kind of in my head, but I hadn't kind of started trying to focus on it, and just started humming to myself. And I was like, oh, there, that's the thing. And so I went and like finished mocking it up real quick before I forgot it. And that was one of those. And then, yeah, other times I'll, be doing something else completely and an idea will pop into my head. So I'll like hum it into the phone real quick and come back to it later. Yeah, you just have to kind of know when something might be a thing that you want to keep and not forget it. And so whether you remember it by recording it or whatever else, yeah, there's lots of ways. I used to keep a notepad by my bed so I could like write things down in the middle of the night, because that happens.
Like 3 a.m. you get a random music idea and
yeah, you never know. Like, have a dream and the dream has music and you're like, oh, that's really good, I need to remember that. Or whatever it is. Wow. Yeah, it's better to be prepared, I guess, right?
Yeah. So Lightfall was the most recent expansion that launched for Destiny. Had so many great themes to it. For Lightfall, you and the team wrote the 3 kind of main melodies, the resilience, discipline, and strength melodies, I think you guys might call them. What goals did you and the team have when it came to writing these important melodies for Lightfall, and how are these different from your goals for writing themes for other releases?
I mean, in general, they're not different in the sense that the goals are always tied to supporting some part of the game, right? So yeah. The theme needs to reflect, well, first of all, it needs to be justified by what the goal of the game is. Like, what is the story? What is happening in the game? And is it even momentous enough to warrant there being a theme? And usually then we'll kind of pinpoint what those themes are that need to happen. And I'll make a list of, okay, we need a theme for this, that, and the other thing. And sometimes that list is smaller, sometimes that list is bigger. It just depends on what's in the game. But for the most part, that is one thing that kind of distinguishes Destiny. We don't do the Peter and the Wolf thing per se, in that, every character has a theme, but there are themes for particular story arcs, for example, or story arcs that are tied to a character. And so a theme might double for multiple uses. And I think the kind of the common ground for every release is like identifying what those are or what they should be, and then getting the right theme. And sometimes palette elements. We often do more than just a theme to represent an idea. Sometimes there's sonic elements that we call palette that are a specific combination of sounds that, say that concept or some theme in the game, so we can make the same statement without actual melodic choices. And so sometimes we'll use one or the other. Often we'll use both. It just depends on the context. But yeah, for Lightfall, the themes are very much inspired by the context of the game, as usual. So
I believe Lightfall is the Destiny soundtrack release with the most use of Laura Intravia. Why was the decision made to include her more prominently in this soundtrack?
I don't know if it's the most. It might be, but I haven't actually done the math. But she's great, and we had a very kind of organic sound. If you look at some of the places where Laura has been featured on our scores in the past, often they have something to do with a similar common theme, and that was one of the themes that was part of this release. But the other place where her voice fit really well was in kind of the representing the human element of the people of Neomuna, and the voice combination with other elements was part of that sound. And so that led to a little more use than we have on certain soundtracks. But yeah, she's fantastic to work with. So
yeah, I had in parentheses like why was the decision made to include her most prominently in the soundtrack, other than that she's amazing? So I knew that would be part of the answer. She is really great. Yeah,
she sounds great. She's a pleasure to work with. She sounds great. You can't beat that combination.
So one of the tracks that features her, you wrote Diffracted Truth. It's one of the tracks I think you can hear it mostly in orbit, and it's scattered kind of around the soundtrack in small references. Can you talk about what feelings and emotions you wanted this cue to give? I know you have to be very vague and limited with this, but
Yeah,
I love
I
it.
mean, I can talk about the feelings and emotions of, but yeah, I mean, it does represent a specific contextual thing in the game,
Mhm.
as pretty much everything we do to some degree or another does. Um, but yeah, there's an element of kind of discovery and unveiling of something that wasn't, known, or something that was hidden before in that, and the vocal in that cue sort of represents the humanity and the purity, the simple truth of it. So it has a functional purpose as well as just being a part of the sound, or contributing to how the cue sounds. But yeah, obviously it's also just nice to have a really good vocal in
Yeah,
some cues, and that cue has a perfect combination of reasons why using it was a good fit there.
it's a really interesting piece. I'm always like staying in orbit so I can listen to the folding. It's great.
Cool.
There's another piece in orbit that I think is just as interesting, if not a little more, because of how just unique it is to the sound of Destiny. Tenebrium, I think it's pronounced. Uh, can you talk about what your goals were when writing Tenebrium and what emotions you wanted to give, like that piece to players? I know again this one's also have to be a vague answer.
Yeah, and honestly, the answer is, excuse me, the answer is pretty much the same as as the previous. It's basically a discovery and a learning or unveiling of something that was previously unknown, but about a different contextual thing.
Yeah, I love what you did with that piece. Tenebrium is one of my favorites of the Lightfall soundtrack.
Cool. Thank you.
Have you ever looked at concept art for the next release and could tell immediately, oh, this is going to be really fun to write music for? And did this happen with Lightfall?
I mean, concept art is always one of the main inspirations when we have it. We don't always have it, but getting to see what something might look like and feel like is a very good place to start. And if I don't have that, then I'll usually ask for, emotional key tone words to kind of help describe what the core goal is for the feeling. And sometimes we'll start there. Sometimes we have the concept art, but it's you know, it depends on where we are when we start, what the specifics are of our situation, and that always varies. But yeah, in some cases we'll start before we have the concept art, and then we'll get it, and that will inspire changes. All of those things happen, and I think some of the pieces on Lightfall, obviously we had concept art and more before we started writing them, and others we didn't, and we started writing them before and then adjusted. So it's kind of there's always that kind of spread of some pieces fall in one side or the other of that.
I imagine it's so hard to be able to write music just going off an image. Like you can't play the thing yet. Like maybe it's not even built. Just you have to go off some concept art and you have to get entire ideas from that.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of I think it depends. If you're starting from scratch and you have no concept beyond just what the image is, then that somewhat limits what you can write and what kind of breadth the music can have, at least with knowledge of whether or not it's going to be appropriate. But if you have the image and some additional description, or maybe some insight into what the story might be, at least like the big overarching beats, that can help kind of guide and shape things as well. But I mean, one of my favorite things to do is just to like be inspired by the way something looks, or by an emotion, or by a single thing, and then let that become what it wants to become. But then the process of like writing music for media always has to do with, oh, it needs to reflect or support this, and so we have to change this thing or make this thing to do whatever it needs to do to represent that thing. And yeah, I'm using thing a lot in my description. The point is, like, there are many aspects of the various pieces of the context, and all of those affect how the music comes together, and the visual and the art is just one. And so it's rare that that's the only thing available to start, but sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not available at all. So
Yeah, you guys just always kill it every time. So no matter how the process starts, I'm always glad the pieces turn out the way they do because they sound amazing.
cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, So I want to talk about a little bit about your past and how you became a composer now. How did you become interested in music composition, and was music a huge part of your childhood?
Um, yes, I mean, I guess I've always loved music. You know, my parents were musical, always had music on in the house, right? So, like most people, just kind of grew up with it, and I enjoyed playing. My parents supported but didn't push too hard. You know, they didn't force me to take piano lessons, which like now having
Yeah.
this choice, kind of wish they had, because you know I'm a fairly terrible piano player, but that I can get around. But yeah, having enough support to be able to do it when I felt inspired to do it, and not the pressure to have to do it was just the right combination. And I knew pretty early on that that's what I wanted to do, and went for it. I actually initially thought I was going to want to be a music teacher. I used to teach
Oh,
um, private lessons, and you know I really enjoyed teaching. Um, and so when I went to college, that was where I thought I was going to focus. And then, before that, I had always worked on on project in the studio, and usually as a performer, but sometimes as an engineer, like a 4-track project with the band I was in or something, um, or mixing a little thing we recorded, whatever, those types of projects. And so I had that exposure, and I wrote music for the bands that I was in, and I wrote music, kind of as a composer before I really learned anything about how to do it. And so I always knew I loved that stuff, but my goal was not to do that per se. So when I went to school, I kind of stumbled onto other aspects of music production that I really, really enjoyed, and that kind of drew me more in that direction. And composition was a part of that, and that kind of led one thing to another. So
did you have any interest in video game music or audio before your time at Bungie?
yeah, although more as a fan. I mean, I
Okay.
always enjoyed playing games. I played a lot of games growing up, and like most of us, there were favorites, and video game music was different and has evolved a lot
Yeah.
in that time. But I think what kind of drew me into it was when it became as mature as it has over the past 15 years. Like, there's full orchestral scores in games now, and it's not only limited to you know samples or 8-bit synths, and the growth there that opens up the possibilities of really making it a mature media has really drawn me to it. But I also really enjoy the dynamic nature of it. And so, having worked a lot in linear media, whether it be writing music just for the sake of music, and it's a piece of linear content that you can really polish it, and does the same thing every time, or music for TV or film, where same thing, it's changing until it's finished, but you're making a fixed thing. The shift of, well, it's not fixed, and it's going to be different every time you
Yeah.
experience it, and it has to work every time you experience it in any weird different combination of ways. Like, that's a really unique part of the process that's really engaging, and I find that to be, um well, like I just said, really engaging.
Yeah.
It satisfies all of the same desires for a music producer or a composer or somebody who works on just linear media, but then it has the added complexity, or you know the added challenge of making the dynamic stuff work. And so that combination I really enjoy. But I kind of strayed off topic from your
Yeah.
question, and
No, that's
uh,
fine.
yeah, I guess the short answer is yes, I did work in games a little bit before coming to Bungie, but not a ton. One of my very first composition gigs that I actually got paid for was a video game project, but the video game never got released. And then I went and did a lot of other things in other industries, and a lot of freelancing. And one of the places I freelanced for was Bungie, and that's kind of what brought me back around several years later to video games. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And to kind of repeat what you said, yeah, just dynamic music in games. That's like interactive music is one of the most fascinating things to me, and that's why I want to try to get into that field when possible. It's a really hard industry to get into, though, the whole game audio scene. Um, I'm gonna show up to I think the GameSound Con. I think you're gonna be doing a talk there too, later this October, I think, next month.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm hoping to make some really cool networking opportunities there and learn a bunch of new stuff about game audio, because it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is. I would say maybe hard to get into, but maybe on par with other industries where there are careers in audio. But I think, like most of them, the best way to get in is to know as much as you can, and either meet the right person and have yourself in the right place at the right time, which is just a matter of circumstance, or really, really, really shed and be really proactive. And often it's a combination of both, like having your stuff ready to go so that when the right opportunity comes up, and you happen to get that perfect combination of circumstances, you can show whoever it is that that you want to be working with that you can do the thing they need. So it is an interesting place. I definitely remember starting out in my career and having those same thoughts, and obviously my career path is different than everyone else's, and I didn't start in games per se. So the best path for anyone, though, is if you know exactly what you want to do. This is unsolicited advice, obviously, but don't give up. Just keep doing it, right? That's the only way you're going to fail, is if you stop.
Did you enjoy your time at Berklee, and were there any fun memories that you can recall while you were there?
Yes and yes. No, Berklee was fantastic. Made a lot of great friends there that I still keep in touch with, all the time. And I mean, too many fond memories to recount, but definitely enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, this seems like a really great place.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing I will just say, it's not really a memory per se, but that I really enjoyed about the way that environment fostered growth was that it was very collaborative and people shared information a lot. And so you would end up not just making friends naturally as part of that process, but also learning organically just by doing projects or doing things and sharing knowledge. And one of the things that I missed when I got out of college and into the real world is like, that doesn't happen quite as much. People are much more closed about their, especially in music production. No, this is my trick. I'm not going to teach you that because that's how I make my money, and I don't want to share my secrets. And so that kind of sharing and camaraderie was much less common. And then when I got back into video game work more prominently, I noticed, wow, video games do have a much more open and knowledge sharing based approach than some other industries that that audio work is prevalent in. And that was another thing that I really enjoyed about working on games.
So I got a bunch of questions from the community, the Destiny community, to ask you now. The first person wants to know, Hunter, Warlock, or Titan?
Yes. I played through Destiny as a Warlock. Destiny 2, I started playing as a Hunter, and was it Witch Queen, or maybe before I started playing as a Titan? And I kind of like all of them for different reasons. So
yeah.
But no, I didn't do the thing where I played all three all the time. I just, at various points, I picked one and dug in. So
keep playing Titan. It's the best one.
I do like things about Titan. I like things about all of them. So
yeah.
Took me a while to get to Titan, though, I'll say.
Yeah. Some of Destiny's enemy types have their own iconic themes and motifs, such as Cabal Stomp for the Cabal, Salvation for Pyramids. Do the Fallen, Vex, and Hive have their own motifs, themes, or melodies the teams like to use to associate with them? If so, can you share which ones?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, each one has certain elements that in Destiny say that. There are sounds, and that goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about palette or combinations of sounds. That's one of the main ways that we will associate, Vex or Fallen, for example. But in some cases, there are also themes that have become associated with each of those. And in some cases, they're pretty obvious, so I don't need to comment on them. But in other cases, they might be a little more subtle. And I won't comment on them and leave them as a find them if you can kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. There are countless iterations of the different motifs in the game, like Guardian, Be Brave. How do you and the team constantly find ways to introduce and sometimes change these themes to feel fresh and unique after all these years? Because some of these themes are like 10 years old now.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess it just happens because you don't want to hear it the exact same way, right? If you're writing music, do you want to write the same exact thing over and over and over again, or does that get stale? Like if you're inspired by the change or it keeps you engaged, then it's going to have that same effect on the listener or whoever else is perceiving the media. And so part of it is just naturally driven by that desire, but then the other part of it is that it needs that. You really can't. You can have the same theme and not change the theme, but you can't present it exactly the same way or play the exact same piece of music. Just like if you put a new game out and you have the exact same cover art, it's like, oh, I've seen that before. It's not, you know what I mean? The familiarity of hearing the theme again is important, and we want to preserve that, but we can bring it forward and make it feel fresh by doing things like changing the harmony or changing the way it's produced or changing the arrangement around it. And all of those combinations are very much geared towards, like I was talking about earlier, the context of whatever the release is in which that theme or those themes are getting brought forward.
Every time we hear Guardian again, it's like there's a new take on it, like a Onirophobia. We thought that was like one of the coolest uses from it that Josh did for that.
Yeah, we really
amazing.
like that one too. Yeah, it's fun to. It's not just fun. It's it's important to have that kind of refreshing from time to time.
Do you have two favorite Kontakt sample libraries or plugins?
Just two?
Yeah, if you just had to name two, because you probably have a lot of favorites.
Yeah, there's too many to just name two, but I guess what I would say is, as awesome as the libraries are, I really still prefer live musicianship, and it's awesome to be able to record things with live players. But there's so many amazing sample libraries. I mean, I honestly can't say which are my top two because I have more than two top ones, but I'll list a few. I mean, everything Dio makes is fantastic. All the Spitfire stuff is fantastic. East West, though it's not Kontakt anymore, their stuff is fantastic. There's, Project Sam and all their libraries, orchestral tools. All of these different libraries have something or things about them that are unique. And if you're producing a score that you're not going to be recording live, a lot of times the main thing you'll need to do is combine the different libraries in different ways to get the sound you're going for. Because one library that sounds fantastic for thing A might not sound as good for thing B. And I've left out some other libraries in there that now that I'm saying this, I'm remembering. But like, if you need a particular, glissando or portamento sound, you might know, oh, I can get that with this library, but then I need to blend it with that library when I go to this other articulation. And some libraries have a good balance of all of them, and sometimes it's not about the articulations, and it's just about the sound of the strings or the sound of whatever instrument, whatever part of the ensemble, and blending the different patches that you have available, the different instruments that you have available to get the sound that you're hearing in your head. And I think the things that draw me the most to them, though, are the libraries that have individual instruments, because it's one of the things I really enjoy doing is arranging as I compose. So instead of just writing with a 2D brass patch, like writing French horns 1, 2, 3, writing French horns 4, 5, 6, here's the trumpet part, like actually doing that arrangement as the music is composed, and making those decisions is a big part of the way I like to work. And so having those libraries that allow that is something that I am drawn to. And so that naturally in some cases means combinations of things anyway. So
are there any music genres or instruments not currently present in any of the Destiny soundtracks that you'd like to see brought into Destiny's musical soundscape? Like a big one for me is like jazz. I'd really like to see like a saxophone in a Destiny soundtrack.
Well, there is a little bit of jazz in Destiny, but it's not saxophone. But we did have, I guess you could call it like kind of like lounge bossa nova back in the original Destiny Jukebox had a piece that was kind of pushing in that direction, but it wasn't swing and it wasn't saxophone. So yeah, I mean, there's tons of things, and I won't get into all of them, but you know, one of the things that I do when we're planning for a new release is look for those opportunities. Like, hey, what is a new thing that we haven't brought in, or what things could actually both fit within the universe of Destiny, but also expand it, that will support the context of this release. And so sometimes those opportunities arise and sometimes they don't, and it's just a matter of kind of finding what they are. But there's many things that I think would be fun to bring in, and maybe someday when the moment is right that will happen. But it's always about, you know, the right combination of things being true to make it worth doing that.
With how much music you and the team are making for Destiny, there's got to be times where you feel a piece doesn't fit the experience, or it ends up on the cutting room floor. What would be possible reasons why something wouldn't make the cut? Have there ever been tracks that were nearly or entirely finished that ended up being cut? If so, can you share why?
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave it sort of general, but in general, one of the main reasons would be either a piece misses the mark as far as like it doesn't quite do the thing it needs to do to support the context, or you know, it just doesn't sound good enough yet. But in both cases, it's always about yet, because what we do is we just change it until it works. And so if, hey, this thing's great, but X, Y, and Z don't quite work, okay, fix X, Y, and Z, and now all of a sudden problem solved. So the cutting room floor is always temporary, and we're very good about pretty much finding ways to fix or evolve or change, or you know, make everything find a place. You know, nothing really ever gets truly left behind in that regard.
Okay. If you're going to put together a Destiny greatest hits CD of the last 10 years, what tracks would you put on there and why?
That's a tough question, and there's too many to list, but I think the obvious ones are the obvious ones, and you know.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a fun question. I'll I'd have to think about it if I were to boil it down to like to fit in a single CD, but that's a fun question.
So collaboration is a big part of the writing and composing process for you guys. Could you share some insights into your approach to collaborating with other musicians and artists? And are there any specific artists or composers who have had a significant influence on your work? So it's kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, I guess part one, we do occasionally bring in collaborators, most often, you know, as performers. But there have been some moments where we've done a bit more than that. Like, you know, one example is having Journey performed by the Kronos Quartet, and that was a fantastic opportunity, and I'm so thrilled that we were able to do that. As far as the second part of the question, the influences, I mean, everybody's influenced subconsciously, whether they want to be or not. And if you've heard a score or you've heard a song or whatever it is, like it becomes part of the sponge that when you squeeze out, you know, your music, it's sort of there whether you mean for it to be or not. And so one of the things that I think is important for a composer or anyone creating anything to do is to be as aware as possible of what those things are and try to catch them, because what you don't want to do is like, hey, I wrote this cool new thing, and like, oh, that sounds like something else. And you know, to a degree, that's somewhat inevitable, because you know, just like with any art form, there are always going to be similarities. But especially with melodies, it's really important to be careful of that. And so for that reason, I generally try not to come into the process with an inspiration or an outside reference piece, or you know, a temp track that's like, hey, we really like this piece of music. Like I'm more a fan of coming into it fresh and saying, what does this thing need, and let's make that, instead of trying to make something else that already exists that somebody else thought was close. And again, like, you know, just because I love some piece of music that someone else wrote, I don't want to emulate that, because what we're trying to do is make a thing that's unique as possible. And so there's always that reality of like, well, you're using the same ensembles or the same, you know, 12 notes or whatever it is, and so that is inherently always a risk. But yeah, I guess the long way of saying I try not to let that influence the process too much.
But do you have any quick advice for early in career composers or people that want to become composers?
Yes. I already gave you one piece of advice, which is if that's what you really want to do, don't stop. It's not an easy thing to get into, but the only way to guarantee you won't get into it is to stop doing it. If you really want to do it, it could take a year, it could take 10 years, but if you don't stop and you keep at it, you'll eventually be doing what you want to do because you're doing it.
Yeah.
And that always leads to opportunities the more persistent you are with it. The other part of that I didn't say is do a little bit every day. If you're wanting to compose, just hone your craft. Even if you only have 30 minutes every day, just sit down for 30 minutes and like make something new or develop something you already started, but just invest the time in honing your craft because the only way you get better is by doing it more.